The rain fell like a curtain drawn across the city, heavy and relentless, drumming against glass, stone, and steel. Neon lights from storefronts bled into the wet pavement, stretching into long, distorted reflections. Adrian Vale stood beneath the awning of his luxury hotel, adjusting his cufflinks as photographers shouted his name. The night was supposed to be perfect, another gala, another reminder that he had won. At 42, Adrian had everything most people spent lifetimes chasing. Wealth, influence, control. His hotel rose behind him like a fortress of success, warm light spilling from its tall windows, music floating out with the scent of expensive perfume and champagne. Guests laughed as valets opened doors, their polished shoes never touching the puddles. Adrian was about to step inside when something tugged at his attention. Across the street, where the light dimmed and the rain hit hardest, two figures lay tangled on the sidewalk. At first, his mind refused to register what his eyes were seeing. Homeless people existed in his world only as background, blurred shapes passed from tinted windows. But these figures were different. Still, collapsed. The man's body curved protectively over the woman's, his arms wrapped around her as if his own thin frame could shield her from the storm. People walked past them. A couple hurried by under a shared umbrella, glancing down for half a second before looking away. A hotel guest slowed, frowned, then stepped around the bodies to avoid splashing his trousers. The rain kept falling, indifferent. Adrian's chest tightened. He felt an old, unwanted sensation rise, something like fear, something like memory. His fingers curled unconsciously at his sides. "Sir," his assistant said gently, "they're waiting for you inside." Adrian didn't answer. He stepped off the curb. The rain soaked him instantly, plastering his hair to his forehead, darkening his tailored suit. With every step toward the couple, the city noise faded, replaced by the sound of water hitting skin and stone. He knelt beside them. The old man's face was gaunt, deeply lined, his gray beard matted with rain. His eyes were closed, lips moving faintly. The woman beneath him was frighteningly still, her skin pale, her white hair spread across the pavement like spilled silk. "Sir," Adrian said, louder than he meant to. "Can you hear me?" The old man stirred. His eyes cracked open, cloudy but sharp with panic. "My wife," he whispered, voice breaking. "Please." She slipped. "I tried to lift her." Adrian touched the woman's wrist. Her pulse was weak, too weak. A surge of urgency cut through him, clean and absolute. "Call emergency services," Adrian said, standing abruptly. His voice, usually calm, controlled, carried an edge that made heads snap around. Now, security moved at once. Without hesitation, Adrian shrugged off his coat, Italian wool worth more than most monthly rents, and draped it over the woman's shoulders, tucking it around her carefully, as if afraid she might shatter. The old man stared up at him, rain running down his face, mixing with tears. "You didn't have to stop," he said softly, almost apologetically. Adrian met his gaze. For a brief, blinding second, he wasn't a billionaire. He was a boy again, sitting in a cold car with his mother, wondering why no one looked twice. "Yes," Adrian said quietly. "I did." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Cameras hovered at the edge of the scene now, but Adrian didn't notice. All he saw was the woman's shallow breathing, and the fragile truth settling in his chest. Success hadn't prepared him for this. But this moment, this rain, this choice, was about to redefine everything. The hospital corridor was quiet in a way that felt heavier than noise. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in pale, unforgiving white. Adrian sat on a plastic chair that was far too small for him, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands clasped together as if holding himself in place. His phone buzzed again. Board members, assistants, a dozen messages marked urgent. He turned the screen face down without reading a single one. Across from him sat the old man, Samuel. His coat had been taken by a nurse, replaced with a thin gray blanket draped over his shoulders. Despite the tremor in his hands, his posture was straight, dignified, almost stubbornly so. He stared at the closed double doors of the emergency room as if sheer will might make them open faster. Minutes stretched, then more minutes. Adrian cleared his throat. "They're good doctors here," he said, unsure why he felt the need to speak. Samuel nodded but didn't look at him. "Eleanor hates hospitals," he murmured. Says they smell like endings. The words settled between them. Adrian glanced toward the doors again. How long have you been married? 52 years, Samuel replied. This time, there was a faint smile. She was late to our first date. Said the bus broke down. I married her anyway. Adrian huffed a quiet laugh before he could stop himself. It surprised him, how easy it felt. Silence returned, but it was different now. Less sharp. Samuel finally looked at Adrian, studying him with careful eyes. You didn't hesitate, he said. Most people do. Adrian swallowed. I almost did. Samuel tilted his head. But you didn't. Adrian leaned back, staring at the ceiling. I've spent years convincing myself that efficiency matters more than people. Tonight reminded me that efficiency doesn't keep you warm in the rain. Samuel nodded slowly, as if filing the thought away. A nurse passed, offering paper cups of water. Samuel's hands shook as he drank. Adrian noticed and felt a quiet surge of something dangerously close to protectiveness. Do you have family? Adrian asked gently. Samuel hesitated. We had a son. He passed years ago. After that, it was just us. Adrian felt the answer land in his chest. He knew the shape of that loneliness. I'm sorry, he said simply. Samuel dipped his head, accepting the words without ceremony. The doors finally swung open. A doctor stepped out, mask lowered, eyes kind but tired. Mr. Samuel, he asked. Both men stood at once. She's stable, the doctor said. Mild hypothermia and dehydration. You brought her in just in time. Samuel's knees buckled. Adrian caught him instinctively, steadying him with one firm hand. Samuel let out a sound, half sob, half breath, and pressed his palm over his eyes. Thank you, he whispered. I didn't know what else to do. Adrian shook his head. You did everything right. When Samuel was finally allowed to see Eleanor, Adrian stayed back, giving them space. He watched through the glass as Samuel took her hand, bending close, whispering words meant only for her. Something shifted inside Adrian, quiet but permanent. Later, when Samuel returned, his face looked years younger. I don't know how to repay you, he said. Adrian stood, straightening his borrowed hospital jacket. You don't, he replied. Then, after a pause, but you're not going back out there tonight. Samuel blinked. We don't have. I own the hotel across the street, Adrian interrupted gently. You'll stay there. Both of you. No arguments. Samuel searched his face, pride warring with exhaustion. Finally, he nodded. Then, he said softly, I suppose tonight the rain didn't win. Adrian looked toward the window, where droplets raced down the glass. No, he said, it didn't. Morning arrived without ceremony. Pale sunlight slipped through the tall windows of Adrian Vale's penthouse, glinting off steel and glass, illuminating a space that suddenly felt too large, too quiet. Adrian stood by the window, coffee untouched in his hand, watching the city wake up below. The rain had washed the streets clean, but it hadn't washed away the image burned into his mind. Two bodies on cold pavement. He closed his eyes, but the memory returned sharper. The way Samuel's arms had curved protectively around Eleanor. The way people had walked past without slowing. The way he himself had nearly done the same. His phone chimed again. Adrian, we need to talk about last night, his chief advisor said over speaker, voice tight. The board isn't thrilled. You missed half the gala. Cameras caught everything. Good, Adrian replied. There was a pause. Good, yes, let them see. He ended the call before an argument could begin. By noon, Adrian was back at the hotel, not the penthouse suites, but the service corridors. He watched housekeepers move quickly and quietly, backs bent, eyes down. He'd passed them 1,000 times without learning their names. Now, he stopped. How long is your shift? He asked one woman, startled into stillness. 10 hours, sir, she answered. For this pay? Adrian asked, glancing at her badge. She nodded. That afternoon, he requested reports he'd never asked for before. Wage structures, staff housing, medical leave usage. The numbers looked clean on paper, and hollow in reality. Across town, Samuel sat beside Eleanor's hospital bed, reading aloud from an old paperback. Adrian visited quietly, bringing soup and a heavy blanket. Eleanor smiled weakly. You look troubled, she said. I thought helping once would be enough, Adrian admitted. It isn't, She studied him with knowing eyes. That's because once you see clearly, you can't unsee. Her words followed him into the boardroom. This is not sustainable, one executive snapped as charts lit the screen. Emergency housing funds, medical assistance. We're not a government. Adrian stood slowly. The room fell silent. No, he said evenly. We're better positioned than one. He outlined his plan. Partnerships with clinics, unused properties converted to housing, a quiet emergency fund for people who slipped through the cracks. Not flashy, not wasteful, precise. This will cost millions, another voice warned. Adrian nodded. I know. And if shareholders revolt, then they were never invested in the future, only the profits. Silence stretched. By evening, the foundation existed. Signed, funded, real. That night, Adrian walked alone through the city. He noticed faces now. An elderly man counting coins, a woman sleeping upright on a bus, a janitor rubbing tired hands. He stopped beside a small park bench where a man sat hunched against the cold. Do you need help? Adrian asked. The man looked up, startled. Then wary, then hopeful. Adrian realized something then. This wasn't charity. It was responsibility, and it weighed less than guilt ever had. The rain returned months later, softer this time, less urgent, more reflective. Adrian Vale stood beneath the same hotel awning where everything had begun, hands in his coat pockets, watching the street glisten under the streetlights. Cars passed, tires hissing over wet asphalt. People hurried along, heads down, chasing warmth. But Adrian was no longer in a hurry. Across the street, the sidewalk was empty. Clean, ordinary, yet to him, it felt marked, like a scar that had healed but never vanished. He could still see them there if he let himself. Two fragile figures, a choice made in seconds. A life split into before and after. Behind him, the hotel doors opened. Adrian. He turned to see Samuel and Eleanor approaching slowly, arm in arm. Eleanor wore a thick wool coat now, her steps careful but steady. Samuel carried an umbrella, holding it more out of habit than necessity. They looked lighter, as if life had finally eased its grip. You always come here when it rains, Eleanor said with a smile. Adrian chuckled softly. It reminds me to pay attention. They sat together on a nearby bench overlooking the park. The city hummed around them, alive, indifferent, beautiful. Samuel reached into his coat and pulled out a worn envelope. I wanted to give you this earlier, he said. Inside was an old photograph. Samuel and Eleanor stood in front of a modest school building, young and proud, chalk dust on their hands, sunlight in their eyes. We taught for decades, Samuel said quietly. We never got rich, but we helped children believe they could be more. Adrian studied the photo for a long moment. Then he looked up. You were wealthy, he said. You just didn't know the balance sheet yet. Eleanor laughed, a warm, full sound. You've changed, she said. Adrian nodded. I remembered. He told them about the housing units now open. The medical fund that had already saved lives. The letters he received. Not praise, but relief. People finally breathing again. I used to think success was never needing anyone, Adrian admitted. Now I think it's making sure no one is invisible. Samuel rested a hand on Adrian's shoulder. Then you're doing well. The rain slowed, thinning into mist. Streetlights glowed brighter. As they parted, Eleanor turned back. Promise me something, she said. What's that? When you're busy. When the world pulls you fast again. Stop. Adrian smiled. I will. Later that night, alone in his penthouse, Adrian placed the photograph on his desk. Not beside awards or contracts, but where he would see it every morning. Wealth, he understood now, wasn't the height you climbed. It was the depth at which you were willing to notice someone else. And every time the rain fell, Adrian Vale would remember the night he finally did.